Bienvenue tous. Welcome to the debate here in France 24. Tonight we're dedicating the programme to the tragic news coming out of Turkey. 2 earthquakes struck this Tuesday. It was in the early hours of the morning as people slept that a quake of 7.8 magnitude hit. The scale of the devastation caused the surrounding area of Gazientep is clear to see from the news footage captured at the scene. Distressing images. The initial impact could be felt as far away as Ankara, Beirut, Cairo, and then we learnt as far away as Greenland. We're talking a massive earthquake. Over the border in northern Syria, the impact was just as devastating. The death toll there rises. By lunchtime, local time, with Turkish emergency crews and civilian rescuers hard at work among the ruins in Gaziantep, and amid aftershocks, there then came a second earthquake, 7.7 magnitude, so almost as big as the first one. One can imagine the destruction and further death that was caused. In this programme, we'll be joined by people who have an insight and, most of all, an emotional connection with what is going on. And they have thoughts and ideas of what should be done to cope with such a natural disaster. We'll be discussing how the world can help Turkey, people hit by a huge-scale natural disaster, and, of course, Syria too, hit by the same issues. Our guests, then, for this special programme here in the studio, we're joined by Yavuz Baydar, journalist and writer of Turkish origin. Sir, thank you very much for being with us, Yavuz. On the other side of our studio, Badawi Ruban, who is a disaster prevention specialist, former director of UNESCO Catastrophe Prevention Unit. Badawi, excuse me for fluffing that one, but thank you, sir, very much for being with us. Joining us from Istanbul, Yusuf Erim, who's a chief political analyst and editor-at-large for Turkish public broadcaster TRT World. Yusuf, thanks for being with us. Also in Istanbul, Matthew Briza, who's a board member for the Jamestown Foundation think tank and a former White House and senior State Department official. Thank you, sir, for being with us. And joining us from Beirut, Jaime Castaneda, who's the program officer at the Syrian Crisis Desk. Thank you all for being with us. Before I let my guests loose to talk about the situation, let's get an update from our reporter, Olivia Salazar-Winspear, here at France 24.
High-stakes manoeuvres as emergency teams race to pull survivors from the destruction. Thousands of people are now actively involved in rescue operations across Turkey in the wake of what President Erdogan has called the worst disaster since the 1939 earthquake in Erzincan. In Diyarbakir, in the east of the country, local people tried to free those trapped in the rubble at first light on Monday morning as they waited for the rescue teams to arrive.
I'm a security officer. I'm responsible for a building. It started to shake. In the past, when it's been shaking, I've been told not to be afraid because the building has a basement floor. This time, when the windows shook, I saw it was an earthquake, and I ran outside.
Bad weather conditions have hampered some of the rescue operations, with snow, rain and blizzards making conditions on the ground more difficult to negotiate. There are now fears that thousands will be without shelter in sub-zero temperatures. The United Arab Emirates and Qatar are sending emergency teams, supplies, and will help to set up a field hospital in Turkey. Relief efforts have also been pledged from a number of European countries, as well as from the EU.
Olivia Salazar-Winspear with that report, giving us an insight into how things are on the ground right now in Gaziantep, and of course on the other side of the border in the Idlib province in Syria. There is mass destruction, there is a large-scale loss of life, and the death toll sadly is expected to rise. We can tell you that Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has declared 7 days of national mourning in the wake of these 2 massive earthquakes. Let's start our discussion. Yavuz Baydar, journalist and author. I can't begin to imagine what you're feeling, so please tell us.
It's a huge tragedy, a disaster in unprecedented scale, which has affected a large area in southeastern Turkey and southern Turkey. This is also unprecedented. In modern history, one has not experienced such a catastrophe, such a tragedy. Humanitarian dimensions of this, I think, will be comparable to the so-called Izmit Bay Gölcük earthquake in 1999, where, according to official figures, 17,000 people had died. but in official figures, much more, certainly. And this one is tending towards that kind of figure. And as I said, 10 to 15 provinces have been affected by this, and this is unprecedented. This is spread across a fault line about 200 kilometers. That makes it one of the greatest catastrophes in the modern times in the Western sphere. Of course, there have been, similar or more magnitude like catastrophes in the eastern side, but this one will be, I think, still an unfolding, as you said, story, and we will have to see what sort of humanitarian cost and material cost it will bring us, and we will not have known this until maybe next week, because there's still, as we speak, many small villages or areas in the rural parts of the geography that have not been reached. Severe conditions in the area, and we hope for the best for the people, especially the younger generation, the kids that have been waiting there, desperately. And international efforts are arriving this evening more and more, and the hopes are and prayers are with them who are stuck in the rubble.
I'm sure everybody shares that feeling. Yavuz, for now, thank you very much indeed. Badawi Ruban, a disaster prevention specialist, former director of UNESCO Catastrophe Prevention Unit. Sir, once again, tell us what your sense is right now, because clearly this is, for you personally and for everybody around here, extremely disturbing what we're seeing. These images are just frightening, aren't they?
I'm afraid that we should be expecting larger consequences of what we can imagine now, immediately, at this hour. The death toll is going to rise dramatically. The rescue operations are going to be very complicated, and the hour now is for rescue and operation and relief, and this is going to be very complicated. Then we are talking about a disaster which is affecting two countries. It is not very often that an earthquake would affect more than one country. It happens, but it's not so often. What happens is that we have a cocktail of these factors which will make of this natural caused disaster a more than natural one. It is not the earthquake which kills when there is an occurrence of an earthquake. It is the environment which receives this earthquake. And we have population not sufficiently prepared. We have houses which are not designed always to withstand this kind of earthquake. We have civil services, public services, which are not necessarily aware of what should be the reaction when there is such a phenomena. And then all this is coming to clash with geopolitical conditions, with zones where there are conflicts, where there is a chaos. So I'm afraid really that the people of Turkey and Syria will have to be patient enough, will have to be accepting that the return to the normal is not going to be within the next few hours.
Badawi Ruban, thank you very much indeed. Stay with us. We've got more to come for you, I know. Let's go to Istanbul for our first of our guests joining us from afar. Yusuf Erim, Chief Political Analyst and Editor-at-Large for the Turkish public broadcaster TRT World. Yusuf Erim, thanks for being with us. And I remind everybody you're joining us from Istanbul. Give us a sense of the reaction there. Give us a sense of how you are feeling.
Well, I woke up this morning in tremendous shock and sadness. Massive earthquake, 7.8 on the Richter scale, probably one of the top 30 earthquakes ever recorded in human history, just to give you a scope of how big that was. Throughout the day, big tremors, one tremor at 6.6, one at 6.5. As worker crews were working, as you guys previously stated, another massive earthquake, just as big as the first one, and tremendous complications and challenges. Sub-zero temperatures right now in the region, over 5,000 collapsed buildings, 2,700 people dead in Turkey and Syria. And this is only the first 12 to 15 hours. This number is going to rise exponentially in the next 3 to 4 days as the damage assessment continues. And crews continue to work into the more remote areas and begin to dig farther and deeper into the rubble. Now, was Turkey prepared for this? Well, Turkey has survived many very large earthquakes before. They have a lot of experience. The institutions have a lot of experience, but I don't think anyone can be ready for 4 major earthquakes in a 9-hour period across a 400 or 500 kilometer span. We're seeing multiple breaks along the Eastern Anatolian fault line, all along the fault line, which has created a huge challenge of logistics. This is not just concentrated into one area. We're talking about a very wide area. We're talking about major cities, Diyarbakir, more than 1 million population, Gaziantep, more than 1 million population, Adana, more than 1 million population, and then mid-level cities as well. So many people need support in so many different areas. A state has finite resources. It's very hard to react when the damage is spread out so in such a wide geography. So may God help the security services, the medical services, officials who are working, experts who are working around the clock, because this isn't a 9-to-5 job right now. Everyone's going to be working through the night. First 72 hours are very, very critical to save as many people as possible, because everything after 72 hours is a miracle.
Yusuf Erim of TRT, thank you for speaking to us there from Istanbul. Please stay with us. Staying in Istanbul, Matthew Breezer joins us from the Jamestown Foundation think tank, former White House and senior State Department official. Matthew, we've heard from our first 3 guests about their personal feeling, but also some more insight into what is happening. What is your take on the situation? Clearly, we're hoping against hope that survivors will be pulled out, but looking at the images that we're seeing, it looks incredibly unlikely, doesn't it?
It's overwhelming, yeah. I mean, these are very experienced response groups, and they're very skillful. But it's a Herculean task, as Yusuf was saying. I mean, this is a 500-kilometer or over 300-mile-long zone of devastation. These 2 earthquakes are not, Yusuf, they're not only in the top 30 in recorded history in terms of the Richter scale, they're in the top 10. And they happen in the same place in Kahramanmaraş within 5 hours of each other. Who knows in the history of geology how many times this has happened, but this is unbelievable. And I feel guilty just being warm and safe in my house. My family and I were praying like crazy, or send positive energy, whatever your religious beliefs are, to those poor people still trapped under the rubble, freezing in the cold, and all the rescue people who are risking their lives as well. Yet may they all be successful. Please find more people. But as you said, it's hard to imagine that there's going to be a miraculous rescuing of that's going to turn around this multiple thousands of victims. And so, that part is horrible. And it's, in some ways even worse in northern Syria, because throughout the course of the Syrian civil war, especially in recent years, the Assad regime and with the Russian Air Force was systematically attacking the hospitals in northwest Syria, and specifically in Idlib, which was hit very hard by this earthquake. So as I understand it, when the day started today, there were 4 operative hospitals in that province of Syria. That's down to 2 because of the earthquake. And to make matters even worse, the main way that assistance has been getting into northwest Syria is from Turkey's province of Gaziantep. And that itself has been so heavily hurt. So much of the assistance that would have gone to those poor Syrians is understandably staying in Turkey to take care of the Turkish people who are under such tremendous suffering as well right now. So this is, in all of my time in my professional career, I have never heard of such a devastating set of earthquakes. Those first 2 huge ones that Yusuf talked about, and then those 2 massive aftershocks at 6.6 and 6.4 on the Richter scale. And this is just the beginning. I mean, so many poor people now can't return to their houses, right? They're worried about the structural integrity of the buildings. If they are lucky enough, though, to get back to their houses, as Mr. Baydar said, in the 10 or 15 provinces affected, they're not able to access natural gas because of the fear of explosions. BOTAŞ, the state natural gas monopoly, has shut that off. What about food? The government is providing emergency bread, but the supermarkets are not operative. What about water? Water is still on in most of these places. But what about electricity? What about communications? This is going to be a rebuilding process that will take years and not just these next few days. And I remember back in 1999, that horrible earthquake in the Marmara region that Mr. Baydar talked about. It took a couple of years until people were no longer living in tents and were back in normal housing. And this seems to be something that's of an even greater magnitude.
Matthew Breezer, thank you very much indeed. Can I just, before I'll let you back in, Yavuz, to comment on that, bring in our final guest, who's in Beirut. Beirut, one of the places where the shock from the earthquake was felt. And as we were saying earlier, these aftershocks were felt as far away. Sorry, the actual tremor from the earthquakes felt as far away as Greenland. That gives you an idea of how powerful this was. Jaime Castaneda is a program officer of the Syrian Crisis Desk. Jaime, thanks for being with us. We've been talking a little bit, Matthew was just mentioning the situation in Syria. Give us a sense from your perspective as to what is happening there and how bad things are.
Yeah, thank you very much. Currently our top priority is to assess the needs of the people in the affected areas. Première Urgence Internationale, which is the NGO I work for, has been present in Syria since 2008. It has allowed us to, set up activities in different governorates along the country, two of which are part of the most affected ones. So Latakia and Aleppo, we have teams that are thankfully safe and that are currently carrying out multi-sectorial needs assessments to try and figure out what exactly the people need. Our main priority afterwards is going to be to get them out and into safe shelter, because a lot of the people are out in the streets because they either lost their shelters or they're afraid of the structural integrity of the buildings they are living in. And as I think one of my colleagues mentioned at the beginning, we have quite a cold wave coming into the country with sub-zero temperatures. So that's going to be the priority for us in the coming hours and days.
Jaime Castaneda, Program Officer of the Syrian Crisis Desk at Première Urgence Internationale. Jaime, thank you, and I'll bring you back in a moment. Indeed, if any guest has anything to say, please just raise your voice and I'll try to bring you in to comment immediately if we can. Yavuz, back to you. Yavuz Baydar.
Matthew was mentioning about, I was also talking about Istanbul earthquake, which was in the middle of the summer, or towards the end of the summer, in the middle of August. And even then, I was a witness to that. We were all with our family at the Bosphorus, middle Istanbul, north of Istanbul, and it was about 40 seconds of nightmare. It was like a, jeep on that rugged terrain, basically, and we felt it. And that was the conditions of the summer. And we went to cover the areas, etc. And we, even then, with the helpful, amicable conditions of the weather, it was a nightmare to watch that went for weeks. Now it's unimaginable how these people are going to cope with these conditions. I should also mention, I was talking to a couple of sociologists, and one was a pollster. The number of people to be affected by this, immediate consequences and long-term consequences of this tremor or series of tremors is more than 13 million, which is one-fifth or one-fifth of the Turkish, or sixth of the Turkish population. And it is, again, unprecedented level of the social. I'm only talking about Turkey, and then we have the Syrian figures and numbers there as well. So this has going to have not only material and humanitarian consequences, but also across the border consequences, geopolitical consequences, and domestic political consequences in the coming weeks and months to come. We still have difficulties, I guess, to predict what is to come in those levels. But those are all question marks that this catastrophe, brings before us.
This idea of so many people, you say 30 million traumatized, affected. It is huge, the scale
Absolutely,
of what we're seeing unfold right now.
Yes, and it's comparable even to the large earthquake in 1939, Erzincan. And I was also in touch or listening to two foremost experts in Turkey, Professor Celal Şengör and Professor Naci Görür. The latter, Mr. Görür, was for 3 years, repeatedly warning the authorities and the people that something is going to happen there, week after week. And this today, he was, severely complaining about nobody had listened to him. Nobody had paid any attention to him, neither on municipal level nor on central power level. And Professor Şengör, maybe it is for you to comment, saying he's one of the top experts of earthquakes, internationally renowned, and he was saying this is not over, because it's not only one fault line. He claims this is also the Dead Sea fault line going down to Israel, and the other going towards Adana to west, and this triangle, he says, is going to create a lot of further potential for a possible earthquake in Adana and also maybe Hatay province as well. He sees this as an very unusual phenomenon, scientifically speaking.
We have a map, Yavuz, which I think will show there are some 6 tectonic plates. You know this, I know, but I'm saying this for the benefit of our viewers, perhaps who aren't aware of the actual layout geographically, geologically as well, of the sort of, you see there are the sort of 6 tectonic plates which are constantly shifting.
These 2 7+ earthquakes that came in follow up each other, they have nothing to do with aftershocks. They are, as Professor Şengör claims, they have to do with 2 different fault lines that have basically collided, seem to have collided.
We have had not only aftershocks, but we have had also somewhat we call swarm of shocks. They are not all necessarily related to the initial big one which occurred at 3 o'clock in the morning. So the geological, the tectonic situation is much more complex than to rely to only one single fault, as is the case in other countries. Now, what is now the urgency, the emergency now, is to look to the mobilization at the international level. This is definitely a situation where the international mobilization is going to be more critical than in other earthquakes, than in other cyclones or in other phenomena, because of the geopolitical context, because we are facing a particular situation in those localities. So the international mobilization, and hopefully the United Nations will mobilize itself very quickly in the next few hours. So there is, one hand, a mobilization, right? But more importantly, a coordination, because we should not create a condition where there will be mobilization. And it was reported that 45 countries today offered help. That's very good, that's welcome. But we do not need that this help would come to aggravate maybe the situation, as is the case sometime in other places. We have seen in Haiti in 2010, when there was a big earthquake, we have seen that there has been a chaos because the mobilization internationally was not organized, was not coordinated. So now the time is for relief, for rescue, of course. This should be concentrated. And this requires international mobilization and cooperation, but this should not wait weeks and months.
Yusuf Erim in Istanbul, the editor-at-large for the Turkish public broadcaster TRT World. Yusuf, you were talking about the number of quakes. We've heard Badawi Ruban discussing that a little bit more. We've heard from Yavuz Baydar about how these quakes were perhaps predicted. We can talk at length about that, of course, but let's just home in on this aspect of how aid, humanitarian aid, and the whole crisis will be dealt with and coordinated. Do you feel right now on the ground there is that kind of structure to deal with that? I mean, clearly, these are the worst of circumstances. So one isn't blaming anybody, but is there a structure set up to actually help this get through, do you think?
Well, first of all, there's two dimensions right now to efforts. There's the rescue dimension, getting people out from under the rubble, and then there's the relief dimension, getting the people their basic necessities. The basic necessities being A, shelter, B, food, C, clothing. Because you right now have a tremendous amount of people who are homeless, not only the 5,000 plus collapsed buildings, but also the buildings who have received tremendous damage. Also people who psychologically can't go back into their house. I remember after the 1999 earthquake, I slept in my car for 4 days. There was nothing wrong with my building, but I psychologically could not take a step inside of the building until that period was over in my mind. I couldn't forget the sound of broken glass, car alarms, the sound of concrete grinding. The sound is something that will live with me forever. And it's something that I'll never forget. And I'm sure many people experience that trauma with this 7.7, 7.8 magnitude earthquake. It is tremendously hard to be able to walk back into a closed structure after surviving something like that. So it's not easy. Now, the international aid aspect, obviously, there's going to be a lot of aid flowing in from countries, a lot of experts and officials coming to the region trying to provide support. I don't view the coordination as a problem. I think Turkey's foreign ministry, and I think the health ministry, the defense ministry, they'll be able to coordinate these type of international efforts. All these ministries have experience dealing with earthquakes. They have experience working together with the international community through separate alliances and institutions. So I don't think that will be a problem organizing the effort. I think the biggest challenges will be logistically, because it's over such a vast area. The wintertime conditions, getting to the remote regions, this is going to be the problem. I mean, we mentioned rebuilding. Rebuilding's a month away. Before we even really talk about rebuilding right now, there's a month of short-term problems that need to be immediately addressed and that are being immediately addressed, because the rebuilding's later. People need to have their short-term needs, their necessities met immediately, and that's what they're looking for right now. So again, I don't even want to talk about rebuilding. That's so far down the line right now. There's so many people left homeless, and again, this is not just the collapsed buildings. This is buildings that have structural damage that are still standing, that could fall in an aftershock, could fall with a breeze even. So all of these things need to be considered. And again, the two dimensions, relief on one side, a rescue on the other side. This is going to happen over the next 72 hours, nonstop. It's not a 9 to 5, it's 24 hours a day for 72 hours. And then after that, we'll begin looking at more medium to longer term solutions to the situations on the ground.
Yusuf, thank you very much indeed. We're staying in Istanbul. Let's bring in again Matthew Breezer, former White House and senior State Department official, board member of the Jamestown Foundation think tank. Matthew, you've been listening obviously to what everyone is saying. We heard from you earlier about your sense of shock as to what has happened. The actual scale of this is something that, if you're looking at it from afar, you don't really see. You hear a place name, you hear another place name, you don't really get the real sense of how far this goes and how much damage this is causing across that section of southern Turkey, across that part of northern Syria.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, you think of, the horrible earthquakes in the last decade plus. I mean, in Japan, when it led to the Fukushima disaster, or in Haiti, those were localized in terms of the destruction. But this is, as I was saying before, a 550 kilometers or 330 mile long stretch of devastation that goes from Diyarbakir, which is, almost to the border of Turkey with Iran and Iraq and Armenia, all the way to the Mediterranean Sea. And there are large municipalities all the way through, as Yusuf was saying, 1 to 2 million person cities all along this stretch, all the way into Syria. It's an overwhelmingly huge area. It's no matter how well prepared any government was, it's going to challenge anybody. So that's why this international response that you were talking about is so critically important. And, it's, as Yusuf was saying, the main task right now is to save people and then get them shelter and food and clothing. But at the same time, the world continues to turn. And I'm hoping that what comes out of this, at least in part, is what happened in 1999 when Greece immediately offered substantial assistance to Turkey. And unfortunately, there was an earthquake a month later in Greece, and Turkey reciprocated. And that led to Greece putting aside their, what seemed like at the time, sort of, trivial diplomatic disputes. And that ushered in an era of warm relations between Greece and Turkey. That has passed, but lasted for a while. And now we see countries, like Greece, but also Armenia and Israel, with whom Turkey's relations have been fraught for quite some time, also offering support, not just political and rhetorical, but also, substantial in-kind support. So hopefully we're going to see people really focus on what matters most here, which is the people. And by the way, as the Minister of Agriculture and Forestry of Turkey was saying today, animals too. Not many people realize how much love there is in Turkey across the culture for animals and street animals. There's a hospital in the part of Istanbul I live for street animals. And so the Turkish government is setting up shelters for animals as well. There's what I'm trying to say is I hope there's a shift in thinking away from these trivial diplomatic, legalistic disputes to focusing on what really matters. And me, this horrible tragedy, once we get through this period of trying to rescue and shelter as many people as possible, may it lead to us all waking up a bit and focusing on humanity.
Matthew, I think many people listening to this will be applauding what you've just said there about putting the diplomatic, political issues to one side and getting on with looking after people. Thank you very much indeed. Jaime Castaneda in Beirut from Premier Urgence Internationale, the Syrian Crisis Desk. Jaime, will everybody in northern Syria get the help that they need? Because clearly what people may have forgotten is that there is obviously a crisis of another sort happening there, where you have the Assad regime and the opposition basically head to head.
Yeah, again, I think what's important to remember here is that right now, everybody's efforts, it doesn't matter what type of actor you are. I think everybody is focused on getting people out of the rubble, and that's what should be coming first. We were mentioning maybe construction or reconstruction, maybe a month down the road. But I think one of the things that is going to be extremely difficult to tackle is going to be the removal of all of the debris before we can actually start reconstructing. This was especially true in the Haiti response. And I would like to link that to what my colleagues, both Badawi and Yusuf, said about the importance of ensuring proper coordination between all actors, to ensure that lives are being saved and that available resources are being effectively used to ensure that the needs of the population are being safely met.
Jaime Castaneda of the Syrian Crisis Desk of Premier Urgence Internationale, thank you very much indeed. There's something that has been raised already. I'm going to bring it back in now. Should Turkey have seen this coming? Yavuz, you mentioned about the warnings given by a particular scientist. Badawi, you mentioned in your first intervention at the very beginning of the program that there were certain things that, in terms of construction, for instance, certain limits that weren't being met. Should this sounds perhaps crass saying this now, but should perhaps someone have seen that this was happening, and should some action have been taken, preventative action?
Absolutely, absolutely. Let me say this. It is not the earthquake which kills. What kills are buildings, infrastructures, uncoordination, not good hospitals, delay in the relief and rescue. This is what kills. And we know that Turkey is a seismic country. We know that Syria is a seismic country, at least those parts of the geographical of the two countries. We know that Turkey will have a big one. This was foreseen. Of course, we cannot know the hour and the day of the occurrence of an earthquake, whether in Turkey, Syria, or Japan, or California. But we knew that an earthquake of such a magnitude, 7.8, can occur. We used to say the big one for Turkey. Now, time is not to blame now. I don't think that now is but of course we have to draw lessons in the long term. This should not be repeated. What happened in BAM in Iran in 2019 also was something which could have been foreseen. So now the rescue is the word of the day, relief and rescue. And this should be done in the following ways. We have to do it on the front of the buildings. What is risking of collapsing? What buildings can again welcome its people? Because people cannot stay hours and days outside. They will complicate the operations. So we need engineers, not only from Turkey and Syria, but from all over the world, to come and help make a survey of buildings. We need now rescue water, medicines. We need to have immediately roads unblocked. So all this, we have many fronts, many challenges that are requiring in the next few hours, in the next few days, and in next weeks and days and months.
And those challenges are absolutely
huge.
Immense, because I'm just thinking as you're talking to me that a solution is to sort of put up some temporary accommodation somewhere. But where do you find the ground clear of debris to put up the temporary accommodation? There's problem upon problem upon problem. Can I bring in Yusuf Erin once again from TRT World? Yusuf joining us from Istanbul. You were mentioning, Yusuf, about rebuilding is going to maybe begin in a month's time or something of that ilk. We're hearing from Badawi about the importance of making places safe so people can get back in. I think that's something you've already evoked for us, that idea that these things need to be made safe before people can even begin to contemplate seeking shelter.
Yeah, I want to talk about Turkey being prepared as well a little. Now,
go ahead.
If I said that there's going to be a major earthquake in Turkey in the next 30 years, I'm with a 90% probability I'm probably correct. Now, just size-wise for American viewers, Turkey is the size of Texas. For European viewers, it's one of the bigger countries on the European continent. Now, what does that mean in the next 30 years? How much can you really prepare? What are you going to do? Rebuild the whole country? There's already urbanization projects that are taking place piece by piece throughout many of the big cities that are at high risk. There's much stricter urbanization and building codes that were in place after the 1999 earthquake and after following earthquakes after that. So, I mean, we need to be realistic with what you can do when you're talking about the scale of a country. I mean, of course, it would be fantastic. Knock it all down, build it all up with new buildings. That, in an ideal world, that would happen. But everyone has finite resources. There's finite finances. It's not feasible to rebuild everything. We have to talk realistically with our expectations, realistically with our criticism. So again, I said earlier in the program, you can prepare all you want. You can have all the experts and professionals, building codes in place, all the stock of critical goods. But how can you be ready for 4 massive earthquakes in 9 hours stretched out over 500 kilometers? I mean, if this happened in the United States or China or Russia, England, France, Germany, how much more prepared could they be for something like this? This is truly a one-off, unprecedented natural disaster we're facing. So I think that's important to understand that Turkey has a lot of experience with earthquakes. They have a playbook. They know how to react. This is something that they're not a stranger to. But I mean, the idea of rebuilding the whole country, I think that's very idealistic thinking without really looking at the reality.
Yusuf, hearing exactly what you're saying, sir. Thank you very much indeed. But please stay with us. Yusuf Erin from TRT. Yavuz.
The major scale Istanbul earthquake, you cannot foresee. You cannot foresee the next earthquake, but I think the priority is being the preparedness of it and the lessons drawn. I think Istanbul earthquake in 1999 brought a lot of issues to the table, and a lot of experts warned that let's get prepared. Education, gathering places in big cities like Istanbul, and the quality of the construction. The construction is a craze in Turkey. There are more constructors in Turkey than the whole of European Union. And this is a memory. And then, you know, the quality of construction has always been on the agenda in the political debates, in the local level, on the central level, etc. And this is still an issue. I mean, preparedness in terms of acting quickly, you know, being aware of the dangers and threats and risks and etc. And I think that debate is inevitably going to haunt Turkey in the following weeks. Of course, we have the priorities of 48 hours, 72 hours, etc. But it's still there, and that preparedness is something that is sort of part of the torment of the fatalistic cultures that let it be. But it's not let it be. You know, we have the example of Japan, which is the cradle of all sorts of heavy earthquakes, etc. And you can take that as a role model and continue. But you know, when you have such large-scale disaster like this affecting 13+ million people, I think the debate will be, you know, proportional to that in the coming weeks, inevitably, just for the fact that today, in this 24 hours, nearly almost all the local representatives of all the political parties in that area and in that region have been under the rubble or just rescued or had relatives, etc., from the power bloc parties or opposition parties. So I think it is inevitably going to lead to a large-scale political debate, no matter how big the magnitude of the disaster is.
As lessons need to be learned.
If I may,
very quickly,
yes, if I may just point out that we should also keep in mind that this earthquake is hitting two countries, Syria and Turkey. Syria and Turkey, you know, are not, they do not have the same conditions today in reacting to this challenge. And the international community should keep this in mind.
Thank you, Badwi Ruban, a disaster prevention specialist, former director of UNESCO's Catastrophe Prevention Unit. Thank you, sir. Thank you to Yavuz Bada, Turkish journalist and author. Thank you for your comments, sir. Thanks to our guests joining us from afar in Istanbul, Yusuf Erim of TRT World. Yusuf, thank you. Thank you to Matthew Breeza, the board member at the Jamestown Foundation think tank. Thank you, Matthew, and thanks to Jaime Castaneda joining us from Beirut, Programme Officer at the Syria desk of Première Urgence Internationale. Thank you for watching. Stay with us. Our coverage continues of the disaster unfolding and that rescue operation continuing in Turkey and in Syria. Stay with us here on France 24.